Ryan Grimm, Dems' big problem, people don't like them. The result is a red wave.
Ryan, what's on your radar?
So on Monday, a Democratic strategist hosted 3 focus groups with women in Virginia who voted in 2017 for Democrat Ralph Northam, in 2020 for Democrat Joe Biden, and then last week cast their ballot for Republican Glenn Youngkin. I spoke to him afterwards to ask about the methodology because when he posted some of the results on social media, there were a lot of skeptics coming at him about the way he was presenting the information. To me, it's a good thing when consultants post as much of the information super wealthy people are paying them to collect so that we can all have access to it and debate it, so I'm glad he did it. The strategist, Danny Barefoot, told me that his firm called roughly 30,000 people in Virginia. Most didn't answer, but several hundred of them fit the criteria he was looking for, having voted Dem, Republican in the last 3 elections. Those people were called back and offered a $100 gift card if they'd do a lunch hour Zoom and talk about why they voted the way they did. 96 of them were broken into 3 different sessions, and Danny sat in on one of them and got permission from the funders to share quotes and results. Focus groups, we should be clear, are different than surveys, which try to weight their responses to accurately reflect the population at large. And 96 respondents isn't generally considered enough for a robust polling sample, but that's not what this is. It's a chance to dig deeper into the views of a slice of the electorate that you care about. Half the group was from Northern Virginia, which is basically the D.C. suburbs. 1/5 were from Hampton Roads, 15% from Richmond, and 15% spread around the Commonwealth. Virginia is about 2/3 white, and this sample was 79% white, so slightly whiter than the state at large, but not by a ton. 11% of them were black women, 6% Latina, and 4% Asian American. As I talked to Barefoot about his results, I thought about a memo that was written after the Virginia election by another Democratic strategist, Andrew Levison, making the argument that Democrats aren't just lacking the answer to their problem with white voters without a college degree, which has become shorthand in political circles for white working class. Their problem
So
is they're
basically
asking
Langley
the
wives.
entirely wrong question.
So it's my understanding that a lot of voters from Fairfax County, which is a huge school district and one of the best in terms of quality because you got all of the Langley fucks. Not like all of them, but and Loudoun County, which Loudoun County is a little bit further out than Fairfax. It's a little bit more in the sticks, if you will. And I would say like that's where like you would have almost like a divide where it's like the Kekona mom wives who definitely showed up. And then the more like suburban-y, ritzy, uppity wine moms in like, Fairfax County. I would say that they were the 2 different subcategories of wine mom that really helped to get Youngkin elected. I mean, it's still part of the DC metro area, don't get me wrong, but we actually saw some some footage of the Loudoun County Board of Education meetings, and you could just tell they were a little bit more rowdy. They were a little less well-spoken, if you get what I'm saying.
The question should not be, he argues, how can Democrats convince the white working class to vote Democratic? Rather, it should be, how can Democrats identify a distinct, persuadable sector of the white working class and then convince members of that specific group to vote Democratic? Levison argues that the data consistently shows that Democrats solidly win about 1/3 of white working class voters, though that number is falling. They also lose about 1/3 right out of the gate. Those are hardcore right-wing people who would never consider voting for a Democrat and think even Chuck Schumer is a socialist and a traitor. A growing number of those people also think he's a cannibal. In other words, they're not persuadable. Levison calls that 1/3 extremist and distinguish themselves from the final third, which he calls cultural traditionalists. These are people who don't follow the news closely but have an easygoing personality and generally an open mind. When it comes to race, these traditionalists have something of a Michael Scott view, rooted in the cliche that they, quote, don't see race or don't see color. They also have personal, religious, and moral values they'd happily describe as, quote, old-fashioned, but say they have no problem with people who have different views. A genuine live in...
What is the difference between cultural traditionalist and white identitarianism? Amy CIA, I don't know her, talking about the different school districts around the offices. I used to live in Falls Church, Virginia, and then I lived in Washington, D.C. What do you mean? What do you mean?
Let live philosophy. They believe in patriotism and the American way of life, but also believe that diversity, pluralism, and tolerance are essential characteristics of that American way of life. They think of government and politicians...
Tolerance of what? Diversity of opinion? That deviates away from what has been considered the norm? Huh? Isn't that the reason why people were up in arms against CRT? It would be introducing a new school of thought that could be indoctrinating. The minds of young children.
As basically corrupt and bought off and often inefficient, but they don't think it's inherently evil, and they can be convinced that government can do good things. They think Democrats are a party that, quote, primarily represents social groups like educated liberals and racial or ethnic minorities while having little interest, understanding, or concern for ordinary white working people like themselves. What's interesting about Levinson's distinction between these cultural traditionalists and what he calls the extremists is that except for that last part, all of it can apply to many, many black or Hispanic working class people as well. And even on that last part, that Democrats don't have much interest or concern for ordinary white working people, that's not really a value judgment, just a statement of fact, or at minimum, it's a statement of that voter's opinion based on Democratic messaging. I mean, think back to Hillary Clinton's rallies, for instance, where she'd single out every identity group that she promised that she would fight for. At some point, when the list gets really, really long and specific, and you're not listed on it, you notice. That doesn't mean you hold it against the people who did make the list, but you do notice. So back to the focus group. Danny said
oh no, the people who showed up and voted for Glenn Youngkin, they noticed. In fact, we listened to, just yesterday, Chad, I put you through that cock and ball torture. You remember? We watched the four white wine moms who are on CNN to get the attention of Democratic leadership. And they were like, yeah, we notice whenever you do not formulate your campaign messages around our needs. We notice. We feel as though you are not representing our interests. And it just so happened the Republican running in the gubernatorial race here in Virginia, he made us feel like we were heard. He made us feel like we're special. So, yeah. How do you tailor a message of inclusivity and diversity while you have these incredibly entitled voting blocs who tend to be the most consistent when it comes to voting in any given election? And they are the ones who literally need less pinpointed messaging when it comes to running a campaign or campaign proposals or policy proposals, rather. I mean, if you think about it, Well, Hillary Clinton is certainly a wine mom herself, but she's also a glass-ceiling feminist, and she was looking to be as inclusive as possible to try to finally break this barrier once and for all. And the majority of white women, over 50% of white women, still showed up for Donald Trump. So, what were white women, undereducated or non-educated white women, what were they doing in that election in 2016? Or better question, what was Hillary Clinton doing for the non-educated white women, who the vast majority of which voted for Trump? I feel like maybe non-educated white women, non-college educated white women are really doing the rest of us a disservice. There's a big brain breakthrough. Huh. What do white women want?
Ask about college education, because what he was interested in was people who lived in the suburbs regardless of race or educational background. What he and Levison found rhymed in some interesting ways. When asked if Democrats share their cultural values, one woman said, quote, "They fight for the right things and I usually vote for them, but they believe some crazy things. Sometimes I feel like if I don't know the right words for things, they think I'm a bigot." When asked which party had better policy proposals, the group overwhelmingly said Democrats. But when asked which group had cultural values closer to theirs, they cited Republicans. It would be tempting to conclude right there that, well, these are just a bunch of bigots, no point even talking to them. But remember that a fifth of them are non-white, and all of them voted Democratic in the last 2 elections. Something else is going on. Danny found that school closures were a big part of it. And as I argued last week, school closures and the CRT debate, critical race theory debate, are mingled in people's minds. One Latina woman put it perfectly, talking about how remote school foisted so much work on parents, yet now McAuliffe didn't want their input anymore. She said, "They asked us to do all this work for months, and then he says it's none of our business." Another woman from Fairfax said, quote, "They would keep schools closed forever if they could. They'd keep our kids online until the 7th booster." Half of the women said they supported school closures, but they were closed for too long. And 35% said they shouldn't have been closed at all. Again, this isn't a precise survey, but 86% of these women disagreeing with Democratic school closure policies suggests the anger was indeed widespread, even if it wasn't that high of a number. Yet other than schools...
Okay, so why were white women so affected? Could it be? Could it be the very same cultural values that, by and large, most people still tend to hold? Where women are still considered the main caregiver, even if they are working or putting in the same amount of hours as their husbands? The same gender norms that Republicans are trying to keep into place? Is that really why conservative women and Democratic women showed up for Glenn Youngkin? It's really interesting because if we're talking about which party seems to be more likely to try to mandate the differences in gender norms forever, it would be the Republicans. The Republicans are also the party who was trying to normalize our heteronormative gender-based standards in this country and force us to maintain our antiquated gender roles in this country. And it just so happens that because of said antiquated gender roles in this country, it's more likely the case that women, even if they were working, were still expected to take care of the kids who were at home during COVID lockdown. And yet somehow the messaging of the Republican candidate was so overwhelmingly relatable and personal that despite the fact that the Republicans are the same party trying to maintain this gender-based order on women taking on the role of both the child care provider and working, maybe just as hard as their husbands or their partners, they felt that Republicans had their best interests to find a way to get kids back into school. Even if that put the kids in harm's way. You know, say what you will about the Democrats, but Democrats made this decision because they were trying to find the best strategy to try to keep kids safe. And obviously a vaccine mandate wasn't going to fucking fly. I mean, think about it. We literally at the beginning of the stream watched that fucking bullshit from Josh Hawley, who literally just like mask off is talking about how the Democrats are killing masculinity. They're killing masculinity. Well, what does it mean to be a man? Well, it means being a husband and being a father. Well, what does being a husband and being a father mean? It means being the sole breadwinner and going out and providing for your family, which means, well, what's a woman? Well, a woman's a mother. Secondary to the male and expected to take care of the kids. Never mind the fact that you can't survive under one income anymore. So now the wife is both working and taking care of the kids. And that is what conservatives are trying to maintain, that social order in the not in the workplace and in home. And at home. They're trying to keep women in this subdued and subservient position under men. And that's the reason why women were so overwhelmed if they had to take care of the kids and continue working during COVID lockdown. Why didn't the Democrats try to, like, you know, get that into the campaign message? Because then they would be acting in a divisive manner, right? That would be too divisive, right? That's what the Republicans would probably say. God, that dead horse is dead.
63% of them said that the state's COVID policies were just about right. In other words, these were not people showing up at anti-lockdown protests or anti-mask protests or anti-vax protests. They just really, really hated the school closures. The women's comments on critical race theory were interesting too. A broad majority had an unfavorable view of it. Some said it meant teaching the worst aspects of our history, while another put it this way: CRT may not be included in the school curriculum, but some of the worst ideas from it are slipping into our schools. One black woman put it this way, quote, "Our kids should be taught about slavery and all of that awfulness, but America is also a good country and that's what I want my kids to learn," unquote. But CRT didn't specifically seem to play a huge role in their voting, since only 1/4 of them said it was being taught in Virginia schools, while half were unsure and
never
another
had a real
quarter said
lockdown.
that
What
it
the
wasn't.
fuck? Schools did.
At the end, they were asked if they'd have considered changing their vote.
And if Virginia didn't have a real lockdown and women without college degrees, they're working. If let's say that there's some spillover where women who don't have college degrees, maybe they were working in lower wage positions during COVID while their kids stayed at home. Well, yeah, that's going to be problematic. I'm not siding with the women in like trying to give them the pass. I'm saying that whenever you start to think about the existing conditions that led women to vote for Glenn Youngkin. Sounds like a daycare problem, not a pay one. Yeah, well, childcare is so fucking expensive too. A lot of people can't afford it either. And that 3-time stimulus payment wasn't enough.
If Democrats had passed their bipartisan infrastructure bill, which is something that Virginia...
Okay, wait, and I'm still trying to figure out what that woman meant when it's like, if I can't think about the right word and I use the wrong one, they think I'm a bigot. You mean like saying... What does that mean? Saying slurs? Okay, if you don't know what the politically correct version of the slur means, then yeah, you are a bigot. I was gonna say like blacks versus like African Americans. You know? Which, okay. Or like non-white, I don't know. Okay, if you say that, then like you're stuck in 1950. Okay, 1970 maybe. Something not okay? Well, that's just an indication that your lack of exposure means that it's hard to even take your own opinion seriously because you're probably coming from a very simple-minded place. And obviously, anyone who is like, well, I'm sorry that I haven't had as much exposure to diverse communities as others doesn't mean that I mean to be intentionally racist. It just means that I lack the vernacular because I live in a homogenous society where it's always been okay to be casual racist. See, it's still not okay. It's still not okay.
Senator Mark Warner had been saying would have helped. 91% said no, and 9% said yes, and one woman laughed and said, what does that have to do with anything? And she's right to laugh, but that 9% number actually points to something hopeful for Democrats. In a close race, a swing like that can matter. If they'd have also passed the reconciliation bill and could talk about universal pre-K, the child tax credit, clean energy investments, subsidies for childcare, you could potentially have won even more of them back. The problem of Democrats being out of touch culturally, though, would still have to be overcome. As the women said, they agree with Democrats on policy. They just don't connect with them. The reaction to the Virginia loss from Democrats, which has been to call all the Youngkin voters racist, only reinforces that disconnect. What Democrats need most is some humility. They need to listen from a place without judgment and try to hear them as people. So if that's the problem, what's the solution for Democrats?
It's a big problem because people vote for who they like, and then they eventually contort themselves to end up agreeing with whatever the views are of the person they've already decided they liked. You know, you and I, people who are really policy focused, people in DC, media people, political wonks, we're all like, well, this is, this person has the right combination of policies that matter to me. Most people are not intensely focused on politics that way.
Well, I mean, I hate that. It is really about charisma, and for whatever reason, people really do ask themselves, would I want to sit down and have a beer with this person? And that is part of like their decision-making process as to whether or not they like them or want to vote for them. The answer, hey Carpy Packs, how you doing? The answer is no. I don't know. See, I think that charisma is used in lieu of actual campaign promises to be kept. And if you are in the business of upholding the interests of your constituents over any other more politically influential force, then you don't need charisma. Charisma is used to find a way to motherfuck your constituents without losing any brownie points or losing any favorability or seeing a drop in your popularity polls. I don't like that either. Sorry, I just got here. Are we talking about the guys from The Rising? I would not want to drink with them. I would love to get a beer with Ryan Grimm. What? I would. Remember when Ryan Grimm wrote an article defending sexual assault victims about a candidate they don't like, then turned around and wrote articles smearing victims of a candidate he did like? No, I did not remember that. Which candidate would that be? Oh yeah? It was a thing? Oh, enlighten me because I don't know about this. Please. Need to watch the new Cody Shody? I haven't watched it yet either on the stream. Well, it was just released today, but... Dun, dun, dun. Dun, dun, dun.